Unitarianism, and I'm speaking specifically about historical Unitarianism, not Unitarian Universalism as we know it today, but Unitarianism is a religion that has historically advocated radical individualism. Just look at the names that comprise the Unitarian pantheon of heroes. That was a joke right there, Unitarian pantheon. Make a note of it, you'll get it later, it's okay. Look at these names: Thoreau, Whitman, Emerson. If you study these men, their words, their philosophies, their lifestyles, you will clearly see a recurring theme: praise for individualism. We modern-day UUs have inherited this core value of individualism from our venerable Unitarian forebears, and if you need evidence, look no further than our 7 principles. Which principle is given primacy over the others? Which principle do we identify as our first? We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This principle, which in no uncertain terms elevates the value of the individual, stands at the top of our principle pyramid. Where in our principles do we find a commitment to the idea of community? Number 7. That's 7 of 7 to be exact, otherwise known as last. The last principle affirms that we have respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. The premium that Unitarians historically have placed on the individual, on the self, is still very much alive in modern UUism today. And don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not here to trash it. Everyone needs a healthy measure of individualism and independence. From the very beginning, both Unitarians and Universalists were courageous, independent thinkers who refused to simply accept the orthodox theology of the day. Many suffered terribly for their idiosyncratic beliefs. Historically, Unitarians and Universalists were the heretics, the rebels, the free thinkers, the question askers, the boat rockers. It's a legacy we should all be proud to share. It's in our theological DNA. And if those qualities didn't exist in some measure in each and every one of you seated here today, very likely you wouldn't be seated here today. You would still be worshiping with the Catholics or the Baptists or the Methodists or whatever church your family originally hails from. It takes a strong sense of individuality and some grit to overcome the inertia that compels most people to simply go with the flow. So yay individualism. But there's a downside. How exactly do you take people? Rather, how do you take persons who are predisposed to be heretics, rebels, free thinkers, question askers, and boat rockers, and put them in a room together and expect to make a unified, cohesive, and coherent community? As many of you know, I used to be a high school teacher. Part of my duties included staffing the school's detention hall. And this was a difficult job. Detention hall was always a collection of the worst 2 or 3 problem children from each classroom, which made detention hall a de facto all-star team of young misfits. Now, contrary to what some of y'all might think, detention hall kids are not intellectually challenged. Far from it. I found that most of the kids in detention were among the smartest kids at the school. The problem wasn't their intelligence or the lack thereof. Rather, it was their inclination or lack thereof to accede to authority when the authority had not justified its own power or position. So this morning, as I look out upon all your wickedly smiling faces, I realize that many of us, myself included, may be the problem children of other churches, which means that UUCJ just might be the religious detention hall of Jacksonville. And fate, or something far more nefarious, has brought us all together in this one single body. Oh, blessed be. But back to the question. How exactly do you take individuals who are predisposed to be heretics, rebels, free thinkers, question askers, and boat rockers, put them in a room together, and expect them to be a community? I'd like to first recognize the fact that even just having the ability to choose for ourselves whether or not to live in community is a pretty astounding thing. It's truly a modern luxury in pre-modern days. One of the most severe punishments a society could hand down to a transgressor was excommunication or exile, to be cut off from one's community. In some cases, this was a de facto death sentence because an individual simply could not survive a solitary life cut off from the protection and resources of a community. But today, in 2014, it is actually feasible for one to live alone comfortably. Modern technology and comforts readily available to the middle class allow you to live days at a time without ever actually having to interact with another living human being. We rarely walk down common paths these days. You need not even take mass transit. You can simply jump into your privately owned car, drive in solitude towards your gated community, park in your attached garage, walk directly into your house, use your cell phone to order dinner from Domino's, get on your laptop and order other sundry necessities from Amazon.com. And some of those things may now be delivered to your doorstep by drone. Y'all seen this? I used to be very critical of President Obama's expanded drone program, but now that I know that I can get my Blu-ray copy of Anchorman 2 delivered to my doorstep the day it comes out via drone, it's obviously all worthwhile. I don't usually get too political up here, sorry. Because of these advances in technology, self-induced isolationism just may be the great temptation of the 21st century. And solitude is ever so tempting when there are so many inherent frustrations associated with living intentionally in community. Living in community requires acknowledging and accepting that the needs of the many outweigh the desires of the few or the one, including the self. The ability to acknowledge and accept this truth requires maturity, it requires patience, requires an ability to delay or divert the drive for instant self-gratification, a drive that has been instilled in us from birth by our modern consumer culture. Compromise is the price of admission to gain entrance into community. But we, Americans, we've been taught that compromise is a four-letter word. Americans don't compromise. Russians compromise. This is America. Speaking of America, I suppose everyone in here has heard of a little fast food place. Sorry, Larissa, it's true. Everybody here has heard of a little fast food place called Burger King, right? Have you heard of Burger King? Yeah, it's a national chain. If you go to Kansas, you'll find a Burger King. If you go to California, there's a Burger King. It started here in Jacksonville. That's why I wanted to say that. It's a local franchise. Do you all know that Burger King started in Jacksonville? Yeah, so literally, Jacksonville, literally, is the home of the Whopper. Another badge of honor we can wear. Speaking of Burger King slogans, how many of you remember the old Burger King slogan, "Have it your way"? Show of hands. You remember that one? Yeah, absolutely. This slogan was actually created in 1974. Now, it was eventually discontinued, but Burger King brought it out of retirement in 1991. And in 1991, they then added the words "right away." So, have it your way, right away. They brought it out of retirement again in 1998. They brought it out of retirement again in 2004. Andrew Keller, the creative director of Burger King's ad agency, in 2004 was quoted as saying that the slogan, "Have it your way," fits well with the emphasis in pop culture on individuality. At a time when self-expression and mass customization are critical elements of culture, that line makes total sense. Burger King kept trying to get away from the slogan, "Have it your way," but they kept coming back. Why? Because the marketing research indicated it was the theme that resonated most with its consumers, modern Americans like us. Have it your way, right away could be the mantra of modern America. Unfortunately, this philosophy is antithetical. It is hostile to the spirit of community. I can pretty much guarantee you that if you come to UUCJ, or any church for that matter, with an attitude of "my way, right away," you will be sorely disappointed. There will be times as a member at UUCJ that you will be displeased. I guarantee it. There will be Sundays that we will do a worship element in a way that you find particularly annoying. There will be Sundays where we will play a song that you hate. There will be Sundays that you can't stand the way a particular RSA talks. And that's all fine. We are a diverse group with diverse tastes. But what I really appreciate about the folks here at UUCJ is that whenever one of you has come to talk to me about something you liked or didn't like about his service, you always did so humbly, with an understanding that although you may not have personally benefited from that worship element, that song, that particular RSA, you knew that somebody else was blessed by it. It's a fascinating phenomenon that operates like clockwork. After a service, someone will come up to me and say, I didn't like X. And I will smile and nod and sincerely affirm their displeasure. It's easy to do that because I know within 5 minutes, I will have 5 other people come up and say, "Oh, X was fantastic." And I will smile and nod and sincerely affirm their pleasure I can pretty much guarantee every one of you that if you have ever personally told me that you liked or disliked something about the service, someone else has said the exact opposite thing that you did to me within about 5 minutes. It's uncanny. And I don't share this phenomenon with you to suggest that any of you should stop expressing these opinions to me. I value the fact that we have this openness. I love to hear them. Don't stop. So far, I've painted a pretty bleak picture about community. As a group, we UUs are predisposed to be radical individualists. We live in an age where we no longer need community to survive. Community requires compromise that often results in personal frustration. So why choose community? 19th century French writer Marie-Henri Beyle wrote, "One can acquire everything in solitude except character." Community creates personal growth. Living in community makes us bigger, better, stronger individuals. Virtues blossom in the garden of community, sharing our lives with each other, celebrating, commiserating, mourning with each other. It forces us to grow in sympathy. And sympathy practiced long enough blossoms into empathy. With empathy blooms kindness, compassion, and love. Even the inherent disadvantages of community can bring forth good fruit. Let us relish even the frustrations, the compromises that accompany community life, because compromise and frustration lead to long suffering and patience. Sacrificing our personal desires for the good of the community teaches us selflessness. And when we as individuals grow, when our character has strengthened, when our spirits have become mature, when our lives have become true gardens of virtue, then we are in a position collectively to create something really special. But not all communities are created equal, and not all communities will achieve their goals, whatever they might be. Josiah Royce was an American philosopher who postulated a theory of community. In this theory, Royce differentiates communities based on what is the driving force that keeps them together. For example, a community that derives its cohesion primarily from its individual members sharing and remembering the same set of past events is a community of memory. Conversely, a community that derives its cohesion primarily from its individual members sharing an expectation of the same future events is a community of expectation, or a community of hope. Now, personally, as a fan of both Greek philosophy and Taoism, I'm very much a believer in the concept of balance. And so Royce's description of communities of memory and communities of hope strikes a resonant chord with me. The two certainly are not mutually exclusive. Royce is talking about the paradox of roots and wings. Our health, our freedom, our success as a community requires both. There's nothing wrong with being a community of memory that celebrates tradition. We at UUCJ should value our long-standing traditions like Olino, like the service auction, and we should celebrate important milestones in our collective history. We should remember and celebrate UUCJ's role in the civil rights movement. We should take pride in the fact that the Unitarian Church of Jacksonville was founded by Duncan Fletcher. We should take pride in the fact that our choir received its name from Bishop Desmond Tutu when he worshiped with us. But we can't allow ourselves to wallow in memory with no eye to the future. We must also be a community of hope, a community of expectation. We must, as a people, even a diverse people, have a common vision that gives us direction and guidance, that compels us, that ever pushes us to fulfill the promise and potential that is Unitarian Universalism. To have wings, we must have a common vision, a common mission, and a common hope. So this morning, I would like to humbly submit one element that I believe should make up a part of that vision. The word sanctuary conjures up different responses and reactions from people. Now, being a former English literature teacher, one of the first things I think about when I hear the word sanctuary is that famous scene from Victor Hugo's novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Even if you've not read the book or seen a theatrical or cinematic adaptation, there's a good chance you know the scene I'm talking about. Quasimodo, the bell ringer of the Notre Dame, has fallen in love with a beautiful gypsy named Esmeralda. She is about to be executed for some alleged crime while Quasimodo swoops down from the Notre Dame, snatches up Esmeralda, carries her back to the church. There, safely on the church grounds, still grabbing her, he cries out to the crowd, "Sanctuary! Sanctuary!" Yes, you guys have been familiar with that. That's good. Quasimodo does this because the church was a literal sanctuary from the secular laws of the land. In most of Europe during the Middle Ages, criminals, if they could reach holy ground, could be granted asylum by the church and thereby escape punishment for their crimes. In those days, the church had its own jurisdiction. So this meant that the jurisdiction of the outside world ended where the church began. Let me say that again. The jurisdiction of the outside world ended where the church began. Even though we no longer live in the Middle Ages, I believe this principle still applies today. Consider these very eloquent words from UU Minister Jean Harrison Newidjar. The fingers of the world are rough. They are rude and crude. They simplify, diminish, and categorize. The public arena mocks and dismisses what is tender. It labels and manipulates, markets all that is marketable, and throws away the rest. We desperately need sanctuaries, places of shelter, where our dreams, hopes, prayers, longings, griefs, and joyful imaginings can be held in a safe and gentle holiness. We need places of order and meaning, places to cry, to open the heart, to touch and be touched. We need safe harbors, places of quiet peace, retreats from noise and ugliness, safety from bullying and deception. Establishing a sanctuary like this based on our shared principles requires not radical individualism, but radical community. And that will require radical love. A sanctuary is a place where you are not condemned and excluded for who you are, your private lifestyle choices, or your principled political beliefs. Whether gay, straight, bisexual, or asexual, whether black, white, yellow, or brown, whether male, female, transgender, or transsexual, whether rich, middle class, or poor, whether your IQ is 80 or 180, whether you have 3 PhDs or a GED, whether theist, atheist, or agnostic, whether prayer or non-prayer, whether a meditator or a non-meditator, whether you prefer Bach, Bob Dylan, or Bruno Mars, whether vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, omnivore, or carnivore, whether smoker or non-smoker, whether Republican, Democrat, socialist, or libertarian, whether pacifist or non-pacifist, whether pro-life or pro-choice, whether pro-death penalty or anti-death penalty, you are welcome here. None of these designations disqualify a person from being a UU. None of them qualify a person from being a UU. None of them qualify you to be a member of this church. None of them disqualify you from being a member of this church. There is only one doctrine at this church: love. Love is the mortar that binds us together as a living sanctuary. Love does not seek to exclude those who are different. Love seeks to better understand those who are different. Now, love does not require you to agree with everyone who is different. Don't misunderstand me. Nor does love require you to stay silent about your own personal beliefs or your identity in order to keep an artificial or superficial kind of peace in a don't ask, don't tell kind of way. Everyone here should feel free to communicate their personal views with each other. That's a part of being an authentic community. That's part of the freedom that comes with a sanctuary. But that communication must be founded on love. That means respecting the person you're communicating with. It means assuming the best of them, not the worst. It means actively listening to hear and understand their views if they differ from your own. It means always treating them with respect, never shaming them, never shaming them, never shaming them for being different. Love never shames. Love does not make people feel inferior. You see, you can't communicate with love while looking down your nose at someone. It is physically impossible. Communication based on love seeks a meeting of both the mind and the heart, not just a blasting of opinions through a bullhorn. UUCJ is and must become this kind of sanctuary. We can be a community with our own jurisdiction, a place immune to the rules and the norms of the outside world. When injustice, discrimination, hatred, or bigotry attempt to infiltrate our community, each of you, as a member of this spiritual community, has the right to look that thing in the eye and say, you don't have jurisdiction here. We make up the rules within this circle. We make the norms. We will decide the values of this community, and within this circle, we will choose the stars that we will follow. The world, with its values, will not dictate that to us. It lacks jurisdiction. But this is not the final step. It's only the beginning. A sanctuary like the one I have described is an oasis from the outside world, one that we all have need of, but access to such an oasis carries with it certain inherent temptations. In pursuing the establishment of this kind of sanctuary, we must avoid the temptations of idleness and disengagement. We UUs have a responsibility to be agents of positive change in this world. Our job is not necessarily to invite more and more people into our sanctuary. I believe rather our job is to take the very walls, the very borders of this sanctuary and expand them, and then expand them again, and expand them again. See, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We don't have to wait for the world to accept or decline an invitation to step into our sanctuary before we show the world our radical love. You don't have to wait for that. We can bring the sanctuary to them right where they are. When we live an intentionally principled life, when we speak freely of our values, the source of those values, and of our faith, when we put love into action, then we are expanding the walls of our sanctuary. We are expanding our jurisdiction in this world, and in doing so, we will help people realize their own need for healing, and that is a powerful first step towards wholeness. I will leave you this morning with a quote from author Wendell Berry that really struck me as I was researching this sermon this morning. Healing is impossible in loneliness. To be healed, we must come with all the other creatures to the feast of creation. Blessed be.